12 spine-chilling road trip horrors, terrifying encounters uncovered on haunted night drives. The radio blared, a cheerful tune masking the encroaching darkness outside. Laughter and voices filled the car as Mark navigated the winding backroads of Tennessee, excitement bubbling in his chest. The fading sunset cast eerie shadows through towering trees, a perfect backdrop for adventure. Sarah leaned forward, squinting at their outdated map, laughter fading into curious conversations about quirky roadside attractions. In the back seat, Emily and Jake were lost in a heated debate over their favorite cartoon's innocent, joyful sounds surrounded by the lingering scent of fast food fries from their earlier stop. Then came the jolt, sudden and jarring. The car sputtered, its engine wheezing before dying, leaving them stranded in a thickening twilight. A tight knot twisted in Mark's stomach while he slammed the steering wheel, feeling panic rise. "Come on," he muttered, jostling the ignition, but the car remained silent, swallowed by night. Shadows seemed to creep closer, a boyish giggle from Jake felt unnaturally long and hollow. We should call for help," Sarah suggested, glancing at her phone. "Wait, there's no service." The words hung heavy as the family peered into the gathering darkness. A flickering neon sign cut through the gloom, Gus's Diner, good food, bad cell service. They grabbed their bags, steeling themselves for what lay ahead. Inside, the diner felt like stepping back in time, cracked vinyl booths squeaking underfoot, the air thick with the scent of old coffee. Dim bulbs swung low, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls, illuminating faces that turned towards them, eyes wary and curious. "What's eating you?" Ruth, a stoic waitress, approached. Her smile was fleeting, vanishing as she eyed their disheveled clothing. Over burgers and coffee, they overheard a couple in the corner booth whispering conspiratorially, their lips barely moving, but the words highway watcher edged closer to their ears, wrapping around them like a chilling fog. "Where are you folks headed on a night like this?" the elderly man inquired, his voice gravelly and laced with an unsettling curiosity. As they exchanged small talk, dread settled in like a cold blanket, saturating every corner of their minds. The tales of the highway watcher intertwined with their conversation, stories of lost souls and disappearances, guardians of the dark roads or sinister figures waiting to pounce. Emily and Jake's eyes were wide, excitement replaced by a creeping fear as the stories grew more intense, each one feeding their imaginations. Mark's heart raced when his phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. "Leave the diner." There's a shortcut, it read, chilling in its abruptness. "Just a prank," he told the family with forced bravado. Yet laughter felt distant now, shadows of fear creeping into their hearts, and every smile from Emily and Jake froze as reality set in. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the kitchen, jarring them from their fears. Murmurs of alarm filled the diner as shadows lurked in unexpected corners, twisting into gnarled shapes. Mark gripped the edge of the table, cold sweat on his brow. He wanted to leave, but panic churned in his gut. Something was wrong. Before they could act, a figure emerged from the obscurity of the kitchen, step by step, the dim bulb casting grotesque shadows across its face. Terror froze every heart in the diner. The figure wore a smile that sent shivers down their spines, one that felt too wide, too unnerving, an unmistakable echo of dread. As the stories whispered in the back of their minds, they realized, perhaps too late, that trust was a dangerous gamble. Hidden in the night, the true horror awaited. What would the family do next? Mark's breath caught in his throat as the figure stepped further into the dim light. It was a man, filthy and gaunt, with matted hair hanging wildly around his shoulders. The smile on his face was wrong twisted, stretched impossibly wide, showing teeth stained with something dark. The diner collectively held its breath, every face frozen, disbelief hanging heavy in the air. "Good evening, folks," he crooned, the sing-song quality to his voice sending needles of fear piercing through the room. Ruth shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting towards the kitchen as if contemplating escape. But the door was held wide open by the man now looming at the entrance, his eyes glinting with something sinister. "Isn't it a lovely night for a drive?" His gaze swept across each member of the family, lingering on the children. Jake shrank back in his seat, gripping Emily's hand tightly. So many stories to tell. He leaned closer, and with each word, the warmth of the diner seemed to drain, replaced by a biting chill. Mark swallowed hard. "Who are you?" he finally managed to croak, his voice barely a whisper. "Just a traveler, like you," the man replied, his smile growing wider, if that was even possible. "But I know these roads, and the things that wander them." A pointed finger gestured outside, as if beckoning them to the darkened world beyond the diner. The couple at the corner booth huddled closer together, their faces pallid. "We should leave," Sarah murmured, but Mark felt rooted to his seat, an intense dread holding him captive. The man took another step forward, and the lights flickered ominously, casting a momentary shadow upon his face that looked almost skeletal. "You really shouldn't be out here, not on a night like this. The highway watcher is hungry." Those words sent a jolt through Mark. He remembered the stories they had heard, a figure lurking in the shadows of the roadside, preying on the vulnerabilities of those who strayed too far from safety. "Stop it," he demanded, trying to sound assertive, but it came out shaky, uncertain. The gaunt man chuckled. "Why, I'm just sharing the truth." But he paused dramatically, leaning closer until his breath smelled of decay. "What's the fun in telling the lovebirds everything?" Suddenly, the power surged, plunging them into darkness. Gasps echoed as a deep thud shook the diner, then silence. Phones flickered on, revealing frightened faces aglow in the eerie light. Ruth's voice broke. "Get out. All of you, now." Mark quickly grabbed Sarah and the kids, urgency driving them towards the door. The man made no move to stop them, still trapped in shadow, but his laugh echoed through the darkness, haunting and cold. Outside, the night wrapped around them like a cocoon, the diner's warm glow a distant memory. Mark scrunched his eyes, scanning the perimeter. The road was empty, the looming trees more intimidating than ever. "We need to get help. There must be a house, something," he urged, clutching Emily's hand. The air felt thick with anticipation, every whisper of the wind filled with silent warnings. As they moved cautiously down the lonely road, the sounds of the diner seemed to fade, replaced by a growing sense that they were not alone. Then it hit. The sharp-edged realization that someone or something was watching them from the trees. A chill prickled the back of Mark's neck. "Keep close," he warned, the fear gripping hold once more. As they stumbled forward, a sharp snapping sound echoed behind them, and when they turned, a pair of glaring eyes caught the dim light. Just beyond the trees, shadows flickered, shifting in the moonlight. And that night, the dread that had settled so heavily upon them only grew heavier as they realized they were not the only ones on the road. What waited for them just out of sight? Would they ever make it to safety? Mark's heart pounded in his chest, drowning out the whispers of the wind. The shadows danced at the edge of his vision, but he dared not look again. "We need to move. Now," he urged, the tremor in his voice betraying his growing fear. With every step, the feeling of being hunted pressed upon them. Ruth's distressed breaths hitched in the air, and Mark caught a glimpse of Jake's terrified face. The child's wide eyes reflected the glow of their phones, but the light barely pushed back the darkness that surrounded them. "There." Sarah pointed into the distance, her voice tight with panic. A small house stood like a sentinel against the night, its windows dark and uninviting. Relief mingled with dread as Mark quickened his pace. They needed shelter, but the moment they reached the porch, a creaking sound sent chills racing down his spine. "Should we knock?" Jake whispered, clinging to Emily. "Yeah, let us knock. What choice do we have?" Mark replied, though doubt gnawed at him. He reached for the door, the wood feeling cold and unwelcoming beneath his palm. He knocked hard, the sound echoing into the night. Silence answered him, the only sound the rustle of leaves overhead. Mark's pulse quickened again. He knocked again, more insistent this time, but no one came. "We can't stay out here. We have to break in," he said, his voice hollow with fear. As if in response, a low laugh sliced through the air. The gaunt man's voice echoed in Mark's mind, twisting like a dagger. Stories linger long after dark. Mark turned abruptly, scanning the trees again. A figure stepped forward, not as terrifying yet, but just as haunting. It was another man, this one dressed in tattered clothes that looked like they had weathered many storms. His face carried a wildness that sent shivers scuttling up Mark's spine. "Please, we need help," Sarah blurted, voice shaky. The stranger's eyes squinted at them, a flicker of something unreadable flashing across his face. "Help?" he croaked, voice like gravel. "You should ve stayed in the diner." "What does that mean?" Mark snapped, seizing the moment of confusion. "The highway watcher is close, friend. You've drawn his attention, and he won't let you slip away." The stranger's eyes darted nervously, revealing the harsh truth of his words. Fear pierced through Mark, sharp and jagged. "How do we stop it? How do we get to safety?" The man only shook his head, stepping back into the shadows. "You can't. You just run, and hope he's not hungry enough for you tonight." Panic surged within Mark. "You're saying we'll die out here?" Just then, the snapping sound returned, closer this time, and with it, the unmistakable sound of rustling leaves. Mark's breath quickened as he grabbed Sarah's hand. "We're getting inside. Now." With pounding hearts, they pushed through the door, which creaked ominously on its hinges. The darkness within swallowed them whole, but a glimmer of hope flickered as they stumbled deeper inside, searching for a place to hide. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind them, the sound echoing like a gunshot. The air felt charged, heavy with an unseen presence. A low growl reverberated from somewhere in the dark, reminding them they were not alone. "Is it in here?" Emily whispered, looking up at her father, confusion and fear in her wide eyes. Mark couldn't answer. He held his breath, straining to listen for any signs of movement. Then, a voice, this one smoother, more persuasive, snaked through the darkness. "Playtime begins now." Mark's hands tightened into fists. The night was far from over, and with every moment that ticked by, they slipped deeper into something unimaginable. What awaited them in this suffocating stillness? Could they escape the embrace of whatever horror was lurking? Time was slipping away, and each second felt more dangerous than the last. Mark felt the weight of the darkness pressing in around them. The silence was deafening, and every breath felt like an intrusion into the heavy air. He glanced at his friends, their faces pale and drawn, each of them battling a battle of their own against mounting dread. "Stay close," he whispered urgently. Ruth nodded, trembling, while Jake clung tighter to Emily. The dim light from their phones flickered, casting shifting shadows that danced along the walls, twisting and contorting with every movement. "Where do we go?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper, eyes wide and darting. The promise of safety seemed far away, its echo fading just as quickly as the last sliver of moonlight outside. "Right there," Mark said, gesturing toward a side hallway that appeared darker than the rest. They moved cautiously, every creak of the floorboards a reminder of their vulnerable state. He could feel a pulse thrumming through the very walls, an unearthly heartbeat keeping time with his growing panic. As they ventured deeper into the house, the air grew cooler and a sense of dread seeped into their skin. Mark's heart raced, an automatic response to the deepening gloom and that suffocating feeling of being watched. Sudden movement caught Mark's eye. A shadow flitted past the edge of his phone's glow. One of the others had seen it too. "Did you see that?" Jake gasped, barely managing to hold on to his sister's hand as he shifted closer to Mark. "Stay quiet," Mark instructed fiercely. "We don't know what that is." A faint scratching sound came from behind them, like claws against wood. Instinctively, Mark looked back, but there was nothing, only the dark suffocating them. He forced himself to breathe slowly, to concentrate on what he could see instead of what his imagination conjured in the shadows. Maybe it left," Ruth whispered, her hope clear yet fragile. But Mark sensed differently. It felt like a lie spoken aloud, the kind that dared the darkness to retaliate. Before he could respond, the voice returned, smooth and chilling. You think running will save you? It echoed through the hallway, making the walls seem to pulse. This is just the beginning of your game and the stakes. There was a pause, an almost playful tone. Your little lives. Mark's stomach dropped as the fear morphed into something sharper, more tangible. What do you want from us? He shouted into the void, demanding answers from the unseen presence that toyed with them. Only what you're willing to give. The voice layered with malice sent shivers coursing down his spine. Are you ready to play? Before he could process the meaning behind those words, a loud crash erupted behind them. The door they had entered through had splintered open, flung wide by an unseen force. The darkness beyond seemed alive and hungry, ready to engulf them. Run! Mark yelled, the word tearing from his lips as adrenaline surged. They turned, sprinting towards the nearest room. They needed to barricade something between them and that lurking horror. As they burst through a door, they found themselves in what looked like a dilapidated den. An old dusty couch sat in the middle, shadowed and morose. Mark slammed the door shut, leaning against it with his back pressed hard as he fought to catch his breath. Is it coming? Sarah panted, her eyes locked on the door, face pale with fear. Should we hide? Ruth suggested, glancing towards a back room. But before Mark could answer, a heavy thud jolted against the door behind him. It knows you're here. The voice permeated the air once more, teasing, like an old friend announcing their visit at the worst possible moment. God, what do we do? Jake whimpered, his fingers trembling in Emily's grasp. Mark forced his voice to steady, the urgency of their situation pressing down on him. We fight back. Whatever it takes. But as he looked around the room, his heart sank. They were utterly trapped, and the night was only just beginning. What would happen next? Could they outsmart a force that toyed with them so cruelly? The scratching intensified, and the door buckled under the pressure. Time was running out. Mark's mind raced, his thoughts spiraling in the chaotic darkness. What could they possibly fight against? The terrifying voice and its implied game wrapped around him like a thick fog. He scanned the room, desperate for anything that might serve as a weapon, as if searching for a flicker of hope among rotten memories and peeling wallpaper. There's nothing here. He hissed, panic edging his voice. He could feel the door shuddering, protesting under the weight of whatever was trying to get in. Adrenaline coursed through his veins, pushing him forward, searching. Check that door. Mark shouted, pointing to a narrow, dust-covered door at the far end of the room. Maybe it leads to a way out. Ruth nodded, her hands trembling as she approached the door. Sarah followed closely. Emily squeezed Jake's hand tighter, her eyes frantically darting back to the main door, where the thudding grew louder and more insistent. The shadows seemed to pulse around them, and with each thud, so did the overwhelming sense of dread. Come on, open it. Mark urged, shifting his weight away from the barricade. Ruth grabbed the handle, twisting slowly. The creak echoed like a thunderclap in the suffocating silence. Light spilled from the other side, illuminating the dust motes swirling in the still air. It didn't feel like safety, it felt like a trap. Are you sure? Ruth started, but the next thud was so violent that the door rattled on its hinges, and Mark's heart raced anew. Do it. Now. He yelled, nearly losing his mind. With one final gulp of courage, Ruth pulled the door open, revealing a cold, dim staircase spiraling down into inky darkness. A musty smell, like old books and rot, wafted up to meet them. If they planned to make it out alive, they had to take that risk. Get in. Mark ordered, as the splintering wood of the door threatened to collapse behind them. Jake was the first to dart into the dark corridor, pulling Emily in behind him. Mark glanced back at Ruth and Sarah, urging them with his eyes. They had no choice. The voice echoed again, taunting from the depths of the shadowy hall. Run, little mice, run. The game has only just begun. The chilling words sent a chill down Mark's spine as he shoved Ruth and Sarah forward, then followed quickly, pulling the door shut behind them. The moment the door clicked into place, an unnatural silence enveloped them. They were in a narrow hallway, the walls damp and rough to the touch. Mark felt around blindly. It felt wrong. This corridor wasn't just any path, it was alive, as if each step echoed a warning. He could feel a heartbeat in the wall, that same unnerving pulse that seemed to resonate with his own fear. "What's out this place?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "Keep moving," Mark pressured, sensing that whatever was coming, they had to be away from that door, as far away as possible. The air grew colder as they quickly descended deeper. The staircase felt endless, each step carrying a weight heavier than the last. Then they heard it, the scuttling sound like claws on stone. The echo of their own panic heightening with every step down. "What's that?" Ruth gasped, snapping around to look back up the staircase. "Shoo! Just keep going," Mark urged, desperately glancing over his shoulder, half expecting something to burst from the shadows behind them. Sudden whispers slithered through the air, faint and somehow familiar. He felt a chill crawl up his spine. They weren't alone. Moving further down, Mark glanced at his friends. Their faces were pools of absolute fear. He could almost hear their thoughts: should we keep going, or is it better to turn back? But retreat was out of the question. The darkness behind them felt thicker, more menacing. As if it would swallow them whole if they dared to peer back. Then, at the bottom of the stairs, they encountered a massive door, old and rotting, with strange inscriptions carved deeply into the wood. Mark's heart thundered in his chest. "What do you think it leads to?" Emily whispered. "I don't know, but I have a feeling whatever is on the other side won't be kind," Mark replied. His voice barely a whisper. The whispers grew louder, beckoning them forward as the door creaked ominously, almost like it was inviting them in. With trembling hands, he reached for the handle. Was it time to confront what lay ahead? Or would this be another step toward doom? He took a deep breath, ready for whatever horror awaited on the other side. Mark's hand froze just above the handle. A chill clutched his heart, but the heavy whispers surged through him, pushing away doubt. He gripped the cold metal firmly and twisted it backward. The door squeaked and swung open, revealing a vast chamber drenched in darkness. The space was enormous, stretching far beyond what the flickering light from the stairs could illuminate. Shadows danced along the jagged stone walls. Even with the door open, a suffocating sense of confinement swallowed them. Mark stepped inside, the cold air wrapping around him like a vice. Once inside, the door slammed shut behind them. The sound echoed like a thunderclap, urging the group forward into bleak uncertainty. Along the walls, grotesque figures loomed, carved to life from the shadows. Their twisted expressions seemed poised to spring, twisted mouths split in silent screams. What is this place?" Ruth said, her voice barely a whisper, fear casting a pall over her expression. "I can't tell, but we have to keep moving," Mark insisted. He turned to his friends, who huddled close. "This is not safe. We need to find a way out." Behind them, the door shuddered ominously as if something was trying to push its way inside. Mark could feel their unity fraying like old rope. The whispers grew louder, pooling around them, each syllable thick with desperation. "Look!" Sarah shrieked, pointing toward the far end of the chamber. Gradually, a dim, ghastly glow emerged. Flickering light revealed another silhouette, a massive altar, reeking of decay and dread, surrounded by weathered candles half burnt down. Mark's blood ran cold as he inched closer. Etched into the altar were disturbing engravings, scenes of despair and suffering danced in the shadows. He could see images of people trapped, as if pleading for release from whatever nightmare had bound them. "They're trapped," Emily said, voice trembling. "Are they?" "No. We can't dwell on that," Mark snapped. "We need to." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed behind them, and shadows poured from the doors. Mark's breath snagged in his throat. The figures they had glimpsed were now fully formed, limbs unnatural and eyes dark pits of despair. "Move!" he urged, grabbing Ruth's arm as they sprinted toward the altar. As they ran, Mark felt icy fingers brush against his neck, a ghastly invitation from the entities now closing in. They could feel the collective breath of despair, a chorus of regrets reaching for them. Jake stumbled, lost in fear laced with confusion. What do we do? What do we do? Stay together. We can't split up. Mark pleaded, looking back only to see shadows inching closer. The altar beckoned them with a dark promise, a hope dashed against cruel stone. Hold on. Maybe there's a way we can bargain, Ruth shouted, her voice straining. There has to be something here, some way to escape. Heart pounding, Mark approached the altar, desperate to find an answer. He ran his fingers across the carvings, tracing the despair. What if it held the key? They had to discover the meaning behind those anguished faces. Then, he noticed an inscription, faintly glowing, reading, "Sacrifice must be made for freedom." And make a sacrifice? Sarah stuttered, panic creeping into her voice. Do we even have a choice? Mark whispered, feeling the weight of his friend's fear pressing in. Before they could process the implication, the shadows lunged at them, and fear became tangible, a choking haze wrapping around their throats. Mark turned away from the altar, the time for deliberation slipping away. So, who's going to be first? A voice whispered, curling through the room, sending trembles down their spines. Eyes wide, Mark stared at his friends. A silence fell, suffocating and palpable, each pulse quickening the question that hung in the air: who among them would take the sacrificial plunge? And then, the darkness pulsed again, demanding answers as it crept ever closer. A deafening stillness enveloped the altar, broken only by the sporadic crackle of dying candles. The oppressive weight of the darkness pressed against them, a living thing hungry for despair. Mark's thoughts raced. He couldn't let the shadows claim them, but how could he choose one of his own to sacrifice? His grip tightened around Ruth's hand, her palms slick with sweat. We can't just let it take one of us. She shouted, her voice trembling, reverberating against the stone walls. Do you think we have a choice? Mark spat, fear bubbling to the surface. We need to find a way out of this. Jake stumbled back, collapsing against the altar, as he grappled with the grim reality of their situation. You mean we just throw someone to these things? I can't. Emily, her face pale as a ghost, grasped the sides of her head as if she could contain her thoughts. Maybe we can bargain. We have to try. The shadows coiled around her, whispering in tones that twisted her resolve. The air thickened as the voice returned, this time more insistent, like the slow drip of a leaking faucet. Sacrifice for freedom, one must be given. Mark felt desperation clawing at him, threatening to pull him into the abyss. No. We will not sacrifice anyone. He shouted, but doubt echoed in his heart. The shadows pulsed, their forms shifting as if they reveled in the torment of the moment. Then what? Jake gasped, his eyes wild with panic. What's the plan? We can't fight them. Just then, a flicker of movement caught Mark's eye. The muscles in his body tightened as he turned to find Ruth glancing toward the flickering flames of the candles. An idea sparked in her expression, a momentary shift in the air, like a candle flickering to life against the storm. Mark. The flames. What about them? Maybe the candles are the key. Ruth urged, her voice stronger now. They're the only source of light down here. It could work, Mark nodded, recognizing the risk now unfolding. If we can ignite something powerful enough. No. The shadows hissed, a symphony of disdain that thrummed through the air, their forms drawing closer. The chill deepened around them, making it more difficult to breathe. Each shadowy figure looked more defined, their mouths widening in sinister grins as if they thrived on the chaos. Suddenly, Sarah staggered under the weight of anxiety. We can't just stand here. We need to take action. Then let us start with these candles. Mark snapped, moving towards the nearest one. He ripped the fabric from his shirt and began to tie it to the top, fashioning an impromptu torch. He glanced at the others, horror and determination intertwined in their faces. Grab whatever you can or find something to light a fire. Ruth and Jake knelt by the altar, rummaging through scattered debris. Emily stood frozen in fear, her breath hitching as the shadows writhed like serpents, ready to strike. "Come on, Emily," Mark urged. "We need you. We have to fight." She blinked as if waking from a dream, and with a shaky breath, she grabbed a half-burnt candle and began scraping alongside the altar, trying to kindle a spark against the dark. Just then, a shriek tore through the air, a sound that didn't belong to any of them. The shadows reeled, a twisted mass of anguished faces, their collective screams mixing with the cries of lost souls. The altar vibrated beneath them, its engravings glowing ominously like a beast awakening from slumber. "Mark!" Ruth shouted. "Hurry!" The moment they lit the makeshift torch, flames blasted outward, swallowing the darkness, but the shadows recoiled with malicious shrieks, their form distorted by the firelight. For every breath they took, the flames flickered as if uncertain against the wrath of the dark. Mark and his friends stood united, but a new realization struck him: they might have awakened something worse. "So this is it. We light a fire and hope it works," Sarah blurted. Fear gripped her chest as the shadowy entities advanced, their eyes glowing with hunger. "No!" Mark cried. "We're not going to die here. If we're to fight, we fight together." And as they readied themselves against the encroaching darkness, a thought slipped into his mind: what if the sacrifice was not just one of them, but a choice that would change everything? The whispers intensified, disappointment steeped in fury as they echoed, "Sacrifice must be made," but then the torches flared, illuminating a scene that left Mark's heart racing. The altar was not only for sacrifice, it held the key to something deeper. The shadows shifted with a new eagerness as a chilling voice rasped, "To escape the dark, one must embrace it," and beneath the flickering flame, an unexpected truth began to unravel, one that would force them to confront their deepest fears and betrayals. What waited in the depths of that altar? Something more than just escape. The fire flickered wildly, casting grotesque shadows that danced on the stone walls, their writhing limbs reaching for Mark and his friends. Each pulse of flame felt like a heartbeat, thumping in time with the rising dread pooling in the pit of his stomach. He could feel the oppressive weight of the shadows surrounding them swell, threatening to consume their resolve. "What do you mean, embrace it?" Ruth's voice quivered, her grip tightening around Mark. They had to find a way out. Or a way to fight. Maybe the altar isn't just a place for sacrifice, but a conduit, Emily stammered, her eyes wide with realization, darting from the altar to the twisting shadows. "What if we could use it to turn the tables?" "Turn the tables?" Jake echoed, a hit of skepticism sharpening his tone. "You want to bargain with these monstrosities? They'll eat you alive." The shadows hissed in reply, an echoing chorus of threats melding into one unified voice. It sounded almost human, yet twisted and cruel. "Only one may leave. Give in, embrace the dark." "No!" Mark shouted, firelight reflecting his panic. "We won't give in. You think we can bargain with ghosts? With shadows that thirst for whatever you want to take from us? Then what do we do?" Sarah gasped, stepping back as the shadows made a lunging motion, like a pack of predators sensing weakness. The low groan of ancient stone filled the air as if responding to their fear. With each shaky exhale, their breaths mingled with the foul stench of decay and despair. Mark's heart raced. "We fight. If we can channel the altar's energy, maybe we can push these things back." Raw determination surged in Mark as he approached the altar, every instinct ringing with alarming urgency. He felt the heat of the torch, his hands steadying as adrenaline drowned out the fear. He ripped free a jagged piece of stone from the altar's base, its edges harsh and biting against his palm. "Where there's light, there's hope," Mark murmured, though faltered as flashes of shadowy figures pressed closer, their claws like elongated talons reaching out. "We just need more fire." In that moment, Ruth and Emily worked in tandem, gathering up the remaining candles, desperately lighting them as they went. The flames sprung to life, casting a defiant glow into the oppressive dark. Shadows screamed again, recoiling from the flickering light, but their shrieks melded into sinister laughter. "Run!" Jake shouted, panic surging through him. "They're coming!" As if to punctuate his urgency, one of the shadows lunged forward, swirling into a funnel of darkness, ravenous and inexplicably alive. Mark's heart dropped as he realized too late that their makeshift fires would not hold against such devastating will. "Mark!" Ruth screamed, jerking him back just as the shadow charged, a frenzied blur across the altar, ripping through the air with terrifying speed. "Fight back!" Mark urged, forcing the stones into a makeshift weapon. "We have to confront it. We can't let fear make us weak." They thrust forward, throwing torches into the fray, flames casting long trails of vivid fire across the cold stone floor. But with every swing, each crack of fire, the shadows pulsed relentless and angry, almost responding with a loud, echoing wail. The ground shook beneath them, a trembling that mirrored the fear in their souls. "The altar!" Emily shouted, her voice trembling, "It's feeding off our fear." Mark's resolve hardened. "Then we need to cool it down. We need to face it. Together." Just as they consolidated their fire, a sudden flash erupted from the altar, and with it, the ground below split open, revealing a gaping void that seemed to pulsing with a dark heartbeat. Mark's stomach twisted as he caught a glimpse of what lay below, twisted forms, eyes filled with anguish, beckoning them with ghostly fingers. "This isn't just a fight, it's a trap." The shadows swarmed, a mass of terror ready to strike. What if their sacrifice didn't just lead to one lost but to them all? "We have to decide." Mark shouted, voice hoarse against the mayhem. "We can fight or we can face the void." At that moment, Mark saw the darkness shift again, and within it, another voice rose, eerily calm. "To embrace the dark, one must find the truth within." The torch flickered dangerously low, the shadows closing in, and an unsettling thought gripped Mark's mind. What truth awaited them in the chaos? Would they find deliverance, or would the shadows claim them all? As the whispering dark crescendoed into a deafening roar, Mark realized that their next choice would determine everything. Would they tether themselves to the light, or plummet into the shadows? And in that final moment of desperation, it wasn't just about survival, it was about unearthing the secrets that bound them together. What awaited them on the other side of the altar? The darkness that promised escape, or an eternal abyss? The shadows lunged, their icy breath mingling with the acrid scent of burning torches. Mark's heart raced as the ground beneath him trembled. Panic washed over him in waves, threatening to pull him under, but he stood his ground, eyes locked on the gnashing darkness ready to swallow them whole. "Mark!" Ruth cried, her eyes glistening with fear. "What do we do?" "Embrace the light," he shouted, clutching the jagged stone, its weight a reminder of the fight ahead. "We have to push back." Emily, still lighting candles, stumbled as a shadow darted toward her, hands clawing for her flesh. She yelped, the sound sharp in the chaos. In a heartbeat, Jake lunged, grabbing her hand, yanking her back before the shadow could snatch her away. "They're trying to separate us," Jake yelled, breathless. "We stick together." Mark caught a glimpse of the altar, pulsating as if alive. Shadows slid over its surface, slithering like snakes. They were feeding off their fear, growing stronger with every second of hesitation. With renewed resolve, they needed a plan, something to balance the scales. "It's the altar," Mark said, urgency driving his voice. "The altar is our only chance. We can wrest its power." He glanced at the void yawning beneath, the twisted wails of lost souls echoing up. He remembered the voice that had spoken, luring them into darkness. To embrace the dark, one must find the truth within. Mark clenched his fists, realizing that their truth, their fears, were their greatest weapon. As shadows writhed closer, the air thickened, bending time and space around them. Mark focused on the lies they harbored deep inside. The guilt, the secrets, the doubts. "Think of what haunts you," he shouted. "Channel that fear into the fire." Ruth's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Fear isn't just weakness, it's power. It's raw. We have to burn it all away. Mark's breath was ragged, but the conviction in his voice steadied his friends. Ruth hesitated, trembling. What if it consumes us? What if it makes us worse? Only if we let it. We can't be afraid anymore. The shadows recoiled slightly, sensing their shifting resolve. Mark reached into the darkness, grappling for the truth buried beneath his own turmoil. A face twisted in anguish rose from the shadows, his father's face, staring back with disappointment. You ran away. You're weak. Mark's heart stuttered, the guilt was suffocating. He felt the edges of despair close in until a flicker of anger surged within him. No. He roared, clutching the stone, channeling the flames into his truth. You're wrong. The ground shook as rays of light burst from his hands, igniting the candles around them into a blazing inferno. Shadows hissed, recoiling in agony as the flames flickered defiantly. They were weakening. Focus. Mark called out, as Emily knelt, hands trembling beside the altar, urging the power within. Together, they poured their fears into the flames, their pasts igniting into the light. And just then, the altar exploded with energy, a blinding column of white light thrusting upward, illuminating the cavern and casting the shadows into a frenzy. We can drive them out. Jake shouted, rallying against the fear. Keep pushing. We're stronger together. In that moment of unity, the shadows wailed, their once overwhelming presence diminishing. Yet, in the midst of their victory, one voice lingered, an echoing whisper that froze Mark's heart, but one truth still remains hidden, your darkest fear. As the shadows began to dissipate, the ground below the altar quaked again, the gaping void growing wider and deeper. Keep it together. Ruth urged, panic slipping back into her tone. What now, Mark? Mark stared into the abyss, terror wrapping around his throat. What could still be lurking in that darkness? And as they pushed back against the shadows, one final question pierced through the chaos: would they emerge as conquerors or become forever trapped within their own fears, lost and wandering in the void? Mark's heart hammered against his chest as the light from the altar surged, valiantly pushing back against the shadows that thrashed and shrieked like wild animals. The once unyielding dark roared in anger, retreating inch by inch as they united their fears into flames. It was a battle, but this was their moment of strength. They were together, and that bond felt almost like a shield against the encroaching darkness. Let us finish this. Mark bellowed, urging his friends to rally around the fire. Embrace your fears. Use them. They are ours, and we control them. With every whisper of courage amidst the shadows, their collective fire brightened, illuminating the faces of those around him. Jake and Emily, fueled by their shared resolve, moved closer to the altar, while Ruth and Sarah held high their makeshift torches, igniting new flames with fresh hope. The shadows screeched again, jarring the very ground beneath them, but Mark felt a determination rise that pushed through the fear like a beacon. This is it. Mark shouted, feeling the power of his friends beside him. This time, we refuse to back down. With a shared breath, they plunged their hands into the flames flickering around the altar and poured every ounce of pain and guilt into the fire. Mark closed his eyes, surrendering to the torrent of emotions that flooded his mind, the lost moments with his father, the doubts that clawed at his every decision, the fear of never being enough. You don't control me. He roared, and with that, a rush of fire shot upward, creating a radiant wave that crashed through the shadows. Together. Sarah cried, her voice cutting through the chaos, and before he knew it, all their fears cascaded into a single surge of light, transforming the altar into an inferno. The shadows screamed in torment, their shapes blurring and dissolving as the light flooded the chamber. Suddenly, a voice reached out from within the tumult, softer yet intensely present. But one truth still remains hidden, your darkest fear. Mark felt an icy shiver creep down his spine but solidified his stance. It's not your fear. It's ours. If you want it, you'll have to take it from us. And with those words, shackles that had bound them in silence cracked, their memories burning bright as they relinquished the weight that had held their spirits captive for so long. In a breathtaking explosion, the flames surged higher, devouring all that threatened to consume them, until a blinding light swept over the chamber and sent the shadows screaming into oblivion. The echoes of fear that had haunted each of them faded to whispers, and as the last of the darkness retreated, they stood at the altar, breathless. The air lightened, and the oppressive heaviness that had suffocated them retreated, replaced by a fresh breeze that whispered promises of freedom. Their eyes met, raw and teeming with emotions: relief, gratitude, love. They had done it, they had faced the darkness and emerged on the other side. Mark glanced around at his friends. Jake looked triumphant, Emily and Sarah were safely together, and Ruth's presence radiated strength. In that moment, they realized something profound: their struggles had united them, they had turned a nightmarish game into a celebration of life, loyalty, and resilience. As they stepped back from the altar, the gaping void began to seal itself, light consuming the darkness until nothing remained but the warmth of their shared victory. The shadows had been vanquished, but they left behind scars, reminders that life came with fears that didn't just visit at night, but walked alongside every day. Together, they could embrace it all. "Let us get out of here," Mark said, his voice steady, leading the way back through the corridor with his heart swelling with the gratitude of escape. They walked out into a newfound dawn, the promise of a new beginning unfolding before them, unmarred by the past. As they emerged, breathless yet alive, they exchanged knowing glances filled with promises of their undying bond. They answered the call of hope, the light surpassing everything that had once sought to drown them in despair. They had discovered a powerful truth: that together, they could conquer the darkest corners of their minds. "Who's ready for a new adventure?" Mark asked, the echoes of their past surging into glowing memories. And in that moment, every victorious heart responded loud and clear: "We are." You need to subscribe now for more heart-pounding stories like this. Smash that like button now to feed the algorithm and keep these tales coming. Flood the comments section with your reactions and theories about how they conquered the darkness. Don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to hear this empowering conclusion.